A small metal blade rests on a wooden table. It looks ordinary, cold, silent. Light from a window touches its edge. The blade shines for a moment. Then the light moves away. Today, we use knives every day. In kitchens, in restaurants, without fear. But there was a time when this simple tool was forbidden. Not just for people were afraid of it. Leaders tried to control it. Some even banned it completely. Why would a knife become dangerous? How could a cutting tool threaten society? The answer is not simple. It is not only about violence. It is about power. Long before modern cities, knives were precious objects. They were not common items. They were rare and valuable. In early villages, metal was hard to find. Blacksmiths worked slowly by firelight. Every blade required time and skill. Owning a knife meant something important. It meant you had access to metal. It meant you had status. But the strange part was, knives were not only tools. They were symbols. A blade at your side could show strength. It could show readiness. It could show authority. In some ancient cities, only soldiers could carry long blades. Ordinary people were not allowed. The rule was strict. Guards stood at city gates. They checked travelers carefully. Hidden weapons were taken away. Market streets were crowded and loud, but sharp weapons were rarely seen. The law demanded it. Leaders feared sudden attacks. They feared rebellion. They feared angry crowds. A knife is small, easy to hide, easy to carry. Unlike a sword, it does not attract attention. It can disappear under clothing. It can wait silently. This quiet danger made rulers nervous. They understood how fast chaos could spread. One blade could start a riot. So rules were created. In some places, blade length was limited. In others, carrying a knife required permission. Few people knew how serious these rules were. Punishments could be harsh, sometimes brutal. Confiscated knives were piled in storage rooms. Metal clanged together in dark corners. A silent mountain of blades. But outside the cities, life was different. Farmers needed knives for daily work. Cutting plants, preparing food. For them, a knife was survival. Without it, tasks became slow and difficult. Work nearly stopped. This created tension between safety and necessity, between control and freedom. In some regions, special small knives were allowed. They were designed for tools, not fighting. At least that was the idea. But any sharp blade can become a weapon. Intent changes everything. Metal does not choose. Travelers told stories from distant lands. In certain kingdoms, only nobles could carry decorated daggers. Their handles were carved with gold. These noble blades were signs of rank. They were worn proudly at the waist, displayed like jewelry. Meanwhile, common citizens walked unarmed, hands empty, eyes lowered. What happened next surprised many leaders. Blacksmiths began making smaller, hidden blades. Thin, sharp, easy to conceal. Some were sewn into clothing. Some were hidden inside boots. Some were disguised as tools. Prohibition did not remove knives. It simply pushed them into the shadows, out of sight. And when something moves into the shadows, it becomes harder to control, harder to track. In one medieval town, officials announced a strict ban. No blade longer than a hand. No exceptions. Public squares were filled with warnings. Wooden boards listed the rules. Citizens gathered to read them. At first, people obeyed. Knives disappeared from belts. Markets looked peaceful, but tension quietly grew. Workers complained in whispers. Hunters felt restricted. But the strange part was, crime did not disappear. It simply changed form. Thieves used tools as weapons. Kitchen blades replaced daggers. Fear returned in new ways. Leaders realized something uncomfortable. A knife is both useful and dangerous. You cannot separate the two completely. In royal courts, advisors debated the issue. Some argued for total bans. Others argued for controlled ownership. The debate was not only about safety, it was about trust. Could citizens be trusted with blades? Behind palace doors, rulers worried about assassination. A small blade could end a dynasty. History had already shown this. Stories spread of hidden knives at banquets, of sudden violence during celebrations, of trust broken in seconds. Fear travels faster than metal. Once a ruler feels threatened, laws become stricter. In some cities, craftsmen had to register their blades. Each knife was counted, each owner recorded. Metal stamps marked approved knives. Unmarked blades were illegal. Confiscation was immediate. Yet even with stamps and lists, knives continued to circulate quietly. The need for them never vanished. Because at its core, a knife is not only a weapon, it is one of humanity's oldest tools. From cutting meat to carving wood, it shaped daily life. It shaped survival itself. To forbid the knife was to challenge something ancient, something deeply human. And so the mystery deepens. Why did certain societies fear it so much? What events pushed them to ban it? The story moves beyond kitchens and markets. It enters courts, armies, and revolutions. It enters moments of crisis. Few people knew that one particular event would change how knives were seen forever. A single act, a single blade, a single decision. In the next chapter of this story, we will step into that moment, a moment when a knife altered history. For now, the blade remains on the table. Still, waiting. It looks harmless. It looks simple, almost innocent. But as history shows, even the smallest blade can reshape a nation. The year was tense and uncertain. A crowded city lived under heavy rule. Whispers filled the narrow streets. Guards walked in pairs at night. Torches burned against cold stone walls. The air felt watchful. In this city, carrying a blade was already restricted, but enforcement had grown stricter. Fear was rising. A powerful official ruled from a large palace. He was respected by some, feared by many. Taxes were high. Food was scarce. Anger moved quietly through the population. Among the citizens was a young craftsman. He worked with wood and leather. His hands were skilled and steady. For daily tasks, he needed a small knife. It helped him cut materials. It helped him earn a living. But new laws had made his tool illegal. Even a small blade required permission. Permission he could not afford. So he hid it, wrapped in cloth, kept close to his body. He was not planning violence. He only wanted to work, to survive. But the strange part was, in times of tension, simple tools gained new meaning. One evening, a protest filled the square. Voices rose like waves. Banners moved in the wind. The craftsmen stood at the edge of the crowd, watching, listening. Guards pushed back against the people. Shields clashed. Orders were shouted. Chaos broke suddenly. Someone fell. Someone screamed. In the confusion, the craftsman was shoved forward. He stumbled. Hands grabbed at him. A guard reached toward his belt. The hidden blade slipped free. Metal flashed in torchlight. What happened next surprised everyone. The small knife became the center of attention. Fear spread instantly. The craftsman panicked. He raised his hands, but the blade was already visible. To the guards, it looked like rebellion. To the crowd, it looked like resistance. Meaning shifted in seconds. The official in the palace heard the news. A citizen had drawn a blade in public. The law had been broken. The story grew as it traveled. Some said he attacked first. Others said he defended himself. Truth became unclear. Emotion replaced facts. Fear replaced reason. The craftsman was arrested that night. His small knife was held up as evidence, a symbol of disorder. In court, the blade lay on a wooden table. Judges stared at it. So small. They spoke about safety, about control, about the stability of the city. Few people spoke about survival. Few mentioned the need for work. The debate focused on danger. The craftsman explained his purpose. He described his trade, his quiet life. But the mood of the city had already changed. Leaders felt threatened. They wanted strength. The verdict was severe. Possession alone was enough. Intent did not matter. The punishment shocked many citizens. It felt excessive. It felt unfair. And in that moment, the knife stopped being just metal. It became political. People began to ask questions. Was the law protecting them or controlling them? Markets grew quieter. Workers hesitated. Trust weakened. But the strange part was, the ban did not remove anger. It sharpened it. Across the region, similar rules appeared. Other rulers watched closely. They feared similar unrest. Blade inspections became common. Random searches increased. Citizens felt watched. Blacksmiths were ordered to record every sale. Some closed their shops. Some worked secretly. Smaller knives became popular, thin enough to hide in sleeves, light enough to carry unnoticed. Prohibition had created innovation. Designs changed quickly. Blades became subtler. Travelers carried stories from city to city, of arrests, of punishments. In distant towns, leaders faced a choice: ban knives completely, or allow limited ownership. Some chose compromise. Short blades were permitted for work. Long blades remained restricted. Others chose strict control. Confiscation squads walked the streets. Metal was collected in piles. Yet violence did not vanish. Arguments still happened. Crime still existed. Officials slowly realized something difficult. A tool alone does not create unrest. People do, but admitting this was uncomfortable. Blaming a blade was easier. It was visible. The craftsman's story spread quietly. Some saw him as reckless. Others saw him as a victim. His small knife became legendary, not for its size, but for its impact, because after that trial, knife laws became stricter than ever before. Fear ruled policy, but beneath the fear, a deeper issue remained: trust between rulers and citizens. And trust, once broken, is harder to repair than any piece of metal. Years passed. The city calmed on the surface, but tension lived underneath. Children grew up hearing the story of the craftsman, of the forbidden blade. They learned that carrying a knife was not only about cutting, it was about risk. But outside the city walls, hunters still carried blades. Farmers still depended on them. Life demanded sharp tools. Nature did not follow city laws. Work could not pause. This contradiction grew wider over time. Urban fear, rural necessity, leaders faced growing pressure. Complete bans were impractical, but loosening rules felt dangerous. And so the story moves forward, from one city's crisis to a wider struggle over control and freedom. Years after the trial, the memory still lingered. The story of the small blade had not faded. It had grown. In distant provinces, people debated knife laws openly. Some demanded more freedom. Others demanded more protection. The issue slowly divided communities. Neighbors disagreed. Families argued at dinner tables. But the strange part was, the knife itself had not changed. Only its meaning had. Merchants traveling between cities carried news. They described strict searches at gates. They described rising tension. Some cities required citizens to surrender blades at sunset. Metal was stored overnight in guarded rooms, returned only at sunrise. This daily ritual felt humiliating to many workers. It suggested distrust. It suggested suspicion. Black markets quietly expanded. Unregistered knives were sold in hidden alleys. Whispers replaced open trade. Designs became more creative. Blades folded into handles. Tools disguised as harmless objects. Small utility knives appeared inside walking sticks. Thin blades hid inside belts. Innovation followed restriction. Meanwhile, Violence between rival groups increased, not because of knives alone, but because frustration was growing. Leaders blamed hidden weapons. They blamed illegal metal. They blamed the black market. Few leaders blamed broken trust. Few admitted that fear was spreading. Fear sharpened everything. In one border town, a fight broke out at a festival. Music stopped. People ran. A small blade flashed in the chaos. No one knew who carried it first, but panic spread instantly. The next morning, new laws were announced. Longer prison terms. More inspections. What happened next surprised everyone. Citizens began organizing peaceful meetings. They wanted dialogue, not punishment. Town halls filled with worried faces. Workers spoke about survival. Mothers spoke about safety. A simple question echoed through the room. Is banning the tool the same as solving the problem? Some officials listened carefully. Others remained silent. Authority felt challenged. Across the region, small protests began. Not violent, but determined. People carried wooden sticks instead of metal blades. A quiet symbol, a peaceful message. The image traveled from town to town. Sticks raised in silence. Metal left at home. But tension still existed underground. Illegal trade did not stop. It simply became smarter. Smugglers learned to move metal parts separately. Handles in one shipment, blades in another, assembled later in secret rooms. Hammer strikes muffled by cloth. Windows closed tightly. Enforcement officers worked tirelessly. Raids increased. Confiscated blades filled storage halls. Metal towers stacked high against stone walls. Cold and silent, like frozen tension. But the strange part was, confiscation did not calm society. It deepened division. Some citizens felt protected. Others felt powerless. Both feelings were real. In rural areas, resentment grew stronger. Farmers believed city leaders did not understand their lives. Distance created misunderstanding. Hunting communities argued that knives were essential. Without them, food supply would suffer. Nature required sharp edges. Military commanders also joined the debate. Soldiers relied on blades daily. Utility and defense were connected. If soldiers carried knives, why not train civilians? The question spread quickly. Scholars began writing essays about balance. They explored history. They studied patterns of control. Some pointed to earlier empires. They showed how strict bans often failed. They showed unintended consequences. Others warned of chaos without regulation. Complete freedom carried risks. History showed that too. The conversation became deeper. It was no longer about one craftsman. It was about philosophy. What does safety mean? What does freedom require? Can both exist together? In one dramatic moment, a respected official publicly questioned the strict ban. His words shocked the council. He argued for reform, not removal of all rules, but smarter rules. His speech was calm and measured. He spoke of trust. He spoke of responsibility. Some applauded quietly. Others glared in anger. Power rarely shifts easily. Rumors spread that he might lose his position. Pressure mounted behind closed doors. Politics turned sharp. Meanwhile, the black market adapted again. Blades were crafted from recycled scrap metal, cheap and easy to produce. These new knives were rough, not beautiful like noble daggers, but effective. The more the ban tightened, the more creative the underground became. Restriction fueled invention. Citizens noticed this pattern. Some began questioning enforcement costs. Was it sustainable? Storage halls overflowed with confiscated metal. Maintenance costs rose. Guards grew tired. Officials faced another uncomfortable truth. Total control required endless effort, endless resources. And still, knives existed, hidden, persistent. The conflict had spread beyond one city. It crossed borders. It crossed cultures. Different regions tried different approaches. Some reduced penalties. Some increased them. Results varied widely. In some places, violence decreased. In others, it remained unchanged. But the strange part was, where dialogue increased, tension seemed to soften. Communities that discussed responsibility openly began rebuilding trust slowly. Step by step, knife training programs appeared. Workshops taught safe handling. Education replaced fear in some areas. Certification systems replaced total bans. Blades were marked responsibly. Owners were accountable. This gradual shift changed the atmosphere. Metal no longer felt like pure threat. It felt manageable. But not everyone agreed. Hardliners demanded strict punishment. They warned of future rebellion. The debate continued in courts and markets. Sharp words replaced sharp steel. Ideas clashed instead of blades. The story of the forbidden knife had now become a story of society itself, a mirror of human tension. And yet, one final twist remained, a realization that would reshape policy quietly. A lesson learned slowly, because sometimes the object we fear most is not the true source of danger. The knife was still metal, still sharp, still silent, but the conflict around it revealed something deeper, about power and trust. Soon, a new generation of leaders would step forward. They would revisit the old laws. They would reconsider the ban. The question was no longer simple. It was no longer emotional. It was thoughtful. What if the problem was never the blade alone? What if the real issue was how society handled fear? The final chapter of this story begins with that question, and with a surprising answer. A new council gathered in a quiet chamber. The walls were lined with old records. Dust rested on forgotten laws. Among those records were the original knife bans, written in fear, signed in urgency. The new leaders read them carefully. They studied the language. They studied the history. But the strange part was, the words spoke more about panic than about solutions. One leader asked a simple question. What were we trying to protect? The room fell silent. Another replied softly. We were trying to protect stability and control. But stability built on fear is fragile. Control without trust is heavy. Heavy systems crack. They invited workers, hunters, and blacksmiths to speak. Voices once ignored were finally heard. A farmer described cutting crops at dawn. A cook described preparing food for families. A craftsman described shaping wood into furniture. Each story returned to the same point. A knife was not born dangerous. It became dangerous in certain hands. The council began drafting new proposals. Not total freedom, not total prohibition. They focused on responsibility, clear ownership rules, clear consequences for misuse. Training replaced suspicion. Registration replaced secret raids. Dialogue replaced silence. Storage halls of confiscated blades were reopened. Metal was sorted carefully. Records were reviewed. Some knives were returned to rightful owners. Others were melted down peacefully, reused for tools and farming equipment. The symbolic mountain of metal slowly disappeared, not through force, but through reform. Communities began holding safety workshops. Parents taught children about respect for tools. Responsibility became part of culture. Crime did not vanish overnight. No policy can erase human conflict, but fear began to soften. Markets felt lighter. Gate inspections became less aggressive. Trust moved back into daily life. The knife returned to belts openly, not hidden, not displayed as defiance. It simply existed as a tool again. Sharp, useful, and the story of the craftsman was retold in a different way, not as a warning of rebellion, but as a lesson about misunderstanding, about what happens when fear guides decisions. Historians later studied this period closely. They noticed a pattern. Objects often become symbols in times of crisis. A blade, a book, a simple tool. When society feels unstable, attention turns toward visible objects. They become easy targets. But deeper problems require deeper solutions. Trust cannot be confiscated. Fear cannot be locked away. The knife itself remained unchanged. Metal shaped by fire, edge shaped by skill. What changed was perspective. Leaders learned to balance caution and freedom. Citizens learned to balance rights and responsibility. Few people knew how close the region had come to permanent division. Policy had almost hardened beyond repair. Instead, reforms slowly reshaped the law, not dramatically, but steadily. Years later, children played in peaceful streets. Their parents carried tools openly. Life felt ordinary again. The forbidden knife was no longer forbidden. It was understood. Understanding changed everything. Fear lost its sharp edge. Dialogue de tension. And yet, the lesson remained important. Power and trust must grow together. If one rises alone, imbalance follows. Because tools are reflections. They reflect human intention. They reflect human emotion. Metal does not choose violence. Hands do. Minds do. The story of the forbidden knife is not truly about steel. It is about society. It is about how fear can transform the ordinary into something threatening, and how understanding can reverse that transformation. Today, a knife rests again on a wooden table. Simple, still. Light touches its edge briefly. It shines quietly, nothing more. The blade does not carry anger. It does not carry politics. It only waits to be used. And perhaps that is the final lesson. Objects are neutral. Meaning comes from us. So the next time you see a simple tool, pause for a moment. Consider its history. Consider the times when fear shaped law, and the times when trust reshaped it again. History often repeats quietly, not always with swords and armies, sometimes with everyday objects. The knife that was once forbidden became a reminder of balance. Balance between safety and freedom, between control and confidence, between fear and understanding. This quiet story still matters today because every society faces similar questions. How much control is enough? If this story made you think, stay curious. History is full of simple objects with powerful stories.